I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, questioning my entire marriage after 12 years. You know, those stories you hear about a cheating wife always seem so distant, like something that happens to other people, not me. But here I am, living it. The name's Dan, and I thought my wife, Amanda, and I had a solid thing going. We've got 2 kids, Max, 10, and Lily, 8. I've always been the one pulling extra shifts to make sure the bills are paid and that the kids never go without. Amanda, well, she's been a stay-at-home mom since Max was born. It was a decision we both agreed on, and I was fine with it. But lately, something's been off, you know? I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. The usual stuff, she seemed a little more distant, started going out more, getting drinks with the girls or needing some me time at the gym. I wasn't really bothered at first, everyone needs their space. Hell, with 2 kids running around, space becomes a luxury, right? Then, she started dressing differently. Amanda has always been attractive, but in the last few weeks, she's been putting in extra effort. New clothes, more makeup, working out harder than usual. I even commented on it, told her she looked great, and she just smiled and said she wanted to feel good about herself. Fair enough. But the weirdest part? The phone. The damn phone was always glued to her hand. And not in that normal, scrolling Instagram way. She started keeping it on silent and face down, which was a new habit. At first, I brushed it off. Then it started feeling intentional. Like she was trying to hide something. Still, I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband who suspects his wife is cheating just because she's acting different. But there's always that gnawing feeling, that gut instinct you can't shake once it sets in. It all came to a head last Friday night. Amanda had been out late again. She said it was dinner with her girlfriends, but when she came back, it was well past midnight, and she smelled like perfume that wasn't hers. I'm not talking about her usual scent either, this was new, something stronger, almost overpowering. She barely said a word when she got in, just went straight to the shower and then to bed. I'm lying there, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it. Was I just overthinking? Maybe she was just having a good time. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, after she fell asleep, I grabbed her phone. It was password protected, but I'd seen her unlock it a million times. I knew the code. As soon as I opened it, I saw a string of texts from a name I didn't recognize, Chris. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just the usual thanks for the great night or some innocent message. It was more explicit. More intimate. The kind of message you don't send to someone unless there's something going on. I didn't need to scroll much further before it hit me, Amanda was cheating. No denying it now. The texts left little to the imagination. They'd been meeting for weeks, maybe longer. There were details about when and where they'd hook up, and more. I felt like I was going to be sick. It's crazy how quickly things can unravel. One minute, you're lying in bed next to someone you've built a life with, and the next, you're questioning if anything about that life was ever real. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was racing with questions. How long had this been going on? Did she ever plan on telling me? Was this some kind of phase, or was she planning to leave? More importantly, what the hell was I going to do about it? The next morning, I went through the motions like everything was normal. I helped get the kids ready for school, made breakfast, all while Amanda acted like nothing had changed. She didn't know I knew. She thought her secret was safe. But now, the ball was in my court. Saturday morning was unbearable. I couldn't stop replaying those texts in my head, each one more incriminating than the last. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I had to know everything. I had to catch her in the act. But I couldn't just confront her without proof. If I was going to blow up my marriage, I was going to make sure there were no doubts left. That's when I came up with a plan. I wasn't proud of it, but at this point, pride wasn't part of the equation. It was about survival. It was about knowing the truth. I needed concrete evidence, something that would prove beyond a shadow of a doubt what she was doing behind my back. Amanda mentioned earlier in the week that she'd be meeting up with her girlfriends on Saturday night. I knew what that really meant. So I decided to follow her. If she was going to meet this guy, Chris, there was no way I'd let her do it without getting proof. By the time the afternoon rolled around, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Amanda was getting ready to go out, spending an extra amount of time on her makeup, her hair. She didn't know that I had already checked her messages earlier that day. There it was, a text from Chris, "Can't wait to see you tonight." That was all the confirmation I needed. I waited until she left. I told her I'd be staying home with the kids, watching a movie. She gave me a quick peck on the cheek, like nothing was wrong, and walked out the door. That kiss felt different. It wasn't just a casual goodbye, it was a reminder of what she was hiding from me. I could feel my blood boiling. Once she was gone, I quickly arranged for my brother to come over and watch the kids. I needed someone I could trust to keep them safe while I dealt with this. He didn't ask too many questions, just gave me a concerned look and agreed. I told him I had something to take care of and would be back later. I grabbed my phone, got in my car, and started tailing Amanda. It wasn't hard, she wasn't exactly trying to hide where she was going. A few minutes later, she pulled into the parking lot of some upscale restaurant downtown. I parked a few spots away and watched her walk in. I stayed back, trying to keep my distance but still close enough to see everything. And then, he showed up. Chris. He was taller than I expected, dressed like he was trying to impress someone. The way he greeted Amanda told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't some innocent hug between friends, it was the kind of hug you give someone you've been sleeping with. They kissed right there in the parking lot, oblivious to the world around them. My stomach twisted, and I had to force myself to stay calm. I took a few quick photos on my phone from the car. The first one was blurry, my hand shaking too much. I clenched my teeth, steadied myself, and snapped a few more. These were clear. Amanda's arm around his neck, his hand on her waist. The kiss. There it was. Proof. They went inside the restaurant, but I didn't follow them. I already had what I needed. For a second, I almost turned the car on, ready to drive home and figure out how I was going to confront her. But something stopped me. This wasn't over. I needed more than just a few photos from a parking lot. I needed to know how far this thing went. I sat there, waiting, feeling every minute drag by. My mind raced through 1,000 thoughts. Was this just some fling? Did Amanda even love me anymore? What would happen to the kids? It was all too much. But I pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. After what felt like hours, Amanda and Chris came out of the restaurant. They were laughing, holding hands. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. They walked back to their cars, and Amanda got in her car. I watched as they drove off, separately. That was a surprise. For a split second, I thought maybe I'd overreacted, maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Then I followed her. She didn't go home. Instead, she drove to a cheap motel on the edge of town. My heart sank as I pulled into the parking lot a few minutes later, watching her car disappear into one of the farthest spots. I parked where she couldn't see me and waited. A minute later, Chris's car pulled in too. He parked next to hers, and they both got out, heading toward one of the rooms. This was it. I grabbed my phone again and quietly got out of the car. I stayed far enough back that they wouldn't notice me but close enough to see which room they went into. I snapped a few more photos, catching them as they walked into the room together. My hands were shaking again, but this time I didn't care. The anger was boiling over now, but I forced myself to keep it together. I waited outside the motel for what felt like an eternity. I knew what was happening inside that room, and it made my skin crawl. Every minute that passed felt like a punch to the gut, but I stayed. I wasn't leaving without knowing for sure. Finally, after about an hour, I saw them again. They stepped out of the room, laughing, looking more intimate than before. Chris kissed her again before heading to his car. I snapped one more photo as they said goodbye. I had enough. More than enough. I got back in my car and just sat there for a while, staring at the photos on my phone. There it was, my wife, the woman I'd spent over a decade building a life with, wrapped up in another man's arms like our marriage meant nothing. When I got home, Amanda was already there, sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She looked up at me with that same smile she'd been wearing for weeks, completely unaware that her secret was no longer hers. "Hey," she said casually. "How was your night?" I didn't answer. Not yet. The confrontation was coming, but I needed a moment to let everything sink in. I had caught her. The proof was right there on my phone. Now it was time to decide how I was going to make her pay. I stood there in the doorway, watching her like she was a stranger. Amanda was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious to the bomb that was about to go off. My heart was racing, and my hands were still trembling from what I just witnessed. But I wasn't going to lose control. Not yet. I had the proof. I had everything I needed to confront her, and there was no way in hell I was going to let her twist this around. "Dan," she said, looking up, her brow furrowing. "Are you okay?" That voice, the casual tone, like she hadn't just been out fucking another man an hour ago, almost made me snap right there. But I held it together, biting down on the anger that was threatening to spill over. "Yeah," I replied, walking further into the room. "I'm fine. Had an interesting night, though." She put her phone down and gave me that fake, concerned smile she'd been wearing for weeks. "Oh? What did you get up to?" I sat down on the chair across from her, staring right into her eyes. "You know, I decided to go for a drive. Clear my head." "Oh," she said, the smile faltering just a bit. "Where'd you go?" "Around town. Just wanted to check a few places out." Her expression tightened, a flicker of something passing through her eyes. Guilt, maybe? Or was she just getting nervous because she knew something was off? Either way, I wasn't about to let her keep playing this game. "I ran into someone interesting, actually," I said, my voice calm but cold. Her body stiffened a little, her hand going to her hair as she tucked a strand behind her ear, her nervous tick. "Oh? Who?" "Chris." Her face drained of color in an instant. She tried to play it off, but I saw the panic flash across her face. Her eyes widened for just a split second before she quickly composed herself. "Chris? From work?" "Yeah." "From work," I said, leaning forward slightly. "You know, I didn't realize you guys were so close." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She just sat there, stunned, like a deer caught in headlights. I could almost see her brain scrambling for an explanation, for some bullshit excuse that might save her from the storm that was about to hit. "I saw you tonight, Amanda," I continued, my voice hardening. "At the restaurant. At the motel. I saw everything." There it was. The moment of truth. Her face went completely blank, and for a second, I thought she might faint. She opened her mouth again, but instead of trying to deny it, she just stared at me, like she couldn't believe she'd been caught. You followed me," she finally stammered, her voice shaking. "Damn right, I did," I said, my anger starting to bubble to the surface. "You think I wouldn't figure it out? You've been sneaking around for weeks, acting all distant, dressing up for girls' nights, but I'm not stupid, Amanda." I knew something was going on. Her eyes darted to the door, as if she was planning to bolt, but she didn't move. She just sat there, frozen, trying to process what was happening. The guilt was finally starting to sink in, but there was something else, fear. "Dan, it's not what you think," she began, her voice shaky but desperate. "I can explain." I stood up, pulling out my phone and holding it up in front of her face. The screen lit up with the photos I'd taken of her and Chris kissing, holding hands, walking into the motel room together. "Explain this," I said coldly. Her eyes widened in horror as she looked at the photos, her hands trembling. She didn't even try to grab the phone, she just stared at the evidence like it was a death sentence. I made a mistake," she whispered, tears starting to well up in her eyes. "A mistake?" I scoffed. You don't fuck someone for weeks and call it a mistake, Amanda. That's not how this works. She broke down then, her face crumpling as the tears started to fall. I'm sorry, she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I'm so sorry, Dan. I didn't mean for this to happen. I should have felt something when I saw her crying. I should have felt sympathy or pain, but I didn't. I felt nothing. Just a cold, hard rage that had been building up inside me for weeks, maybe even months. Watching her sit there, sobbing, made me feel like I was looking at a stranger. This wasn't the woman I'd married. This wasn't the mother of my children. This was someone who had betrayed me, destroyed our family, and didn't even have the decency to come clean until I had to drag the truth out of her. How long? I demanded, my voice cold. She sniffled, wiping her tears with her hands. It started a few months ago, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I swear, Dan, I love you. I don't know why I did this. I let out a bitter laugh. You love me? Is that supposed to make this better? You love me, but you've been screwing another man for months? I know, it's awful, she sobbed, but I never wanted to leave you. You just what? I snapped, cutting her off. You just needed a little extra on the side? What was it, Amanda? What did he give you that I didn't? She shook her head, her face streaked with tears. It wasn't like that. I was lonely, Dan. You've been so busy with work, with the kids, and I don't know. I made a horrible mistake. A mistake you made over and over again, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Yeah, sounds like a real accident. She cried harder, her body shaking as she tried to explain herself. I didn't mean to hurt you. I never wanted this to happen. You never wanted to get caught, I corrected her. That's what you didn't want. I could see the guilt weighing her down, but I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. What were you thinking, Amanda? Did you honestly believe I wouldn't find out? That I'd just sit here like an idiot while you ran around with him? I could feel the rage boiling over now, my voice getting louder. I was going to end it, she said through her tears. I swear, I was going to break it off tonight. I didn't believe her for a second. Sure you were. That's why you took him to a motel, right? Real classy way to end things. She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I know you hate me right now, she said quietly, her voice trembling. But please, Dan, please give me another chance. I'll do anything to make this right. I stared at her, my chest heaving with anger. I wanted to scream at her, throw things, break everything in the room. But I didn't. I just stood there, watching her beg for a second chance, wondering how the hell I was supposed to fix something that was so completely broken. You want another chance? I asked, my voice low and steady. She nodded desperately, her eyes pleading with me. Yes, please. I'll do anything. I took a deep breath, the weight of everything crashing down on me. Fine, I said finally. You'll get your chance. But trust me, Amanda, things are going to change around here. Starting with Chris. She wiped her tears, nodding quickly. I'll end it. I'll never see him again, I promise. You're damn right you won't, I said, my voice hardening. And as for us, we'll see if there's anything left to salvage after this. The silence that followed was suffocating. Amanda sat there, broken and crying, while I stood over her, seething with anger. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The house was quiet after the confrontation. Amanda cried herself to sleep on the couch, and I ended up in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, wide awake. My mind was racing, replaying the night's events over and over. I had all the proof I needed, but something in me wanted more than just confrontation. I wanted her to feel what I felt, to understand just how deep this cut went. But I wasn't going to scream or hit walls like some cliché scene out of a movie. No, I had something better in mind. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind already set on what needed to happen. I'd let her stew for a bit, make her think that everything was still up in the air. But inside, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Amanda was already awake when I came downstairs, her eyes red and puffy from crying all night. She looked at me with a mixture of hope and dread, like she was waiting for me to decide her fate. I didn't say a word, just grabbed a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. I wanted her to squirm, to feel the silence pressing down on her like a weight she couldn't escape. "Dan, about last night," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. I held up a hand to stop her. "Not now," I said flatly. "We'll talk later." She nodded, clearly relieved that I wasn't coming at her full force this morning, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Good. She should be scared. She should be terrified. I left the house soon after, telling her I needed some air. Truth was, I had something planned. My first stop was the local print shop. I walked in and had all the photos I took last night printed on glossy, high-quality paper. There was something about seeing them physically that made it all feel more real. I flipped through the stack, the kiss in the parking lot, the way they walked into the motel together like they had nothing to hide. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with them yet, but I knew they'd come in handy soon enough. The real plan, though, wasn't about the photos. That was just a warm-up. I needed to hit Amanda where it hurt. And I knew exactly how. For years, Amanda had cultivated this perfect image among our friends and family, the devoted wife, the stay-at-home mom who always had everything under control. She prided herself on it. Every holiday, every birthday, she was the one posting pictures online, making sure the world saw the happy family she worked so hard to present. She loved the attention, the praise from her friends about how lucky she was to have such a perfect life. But that perfect life was about to crumble, and I was going to be the one to kick it down. I spent the rest of the day preparing. Amanda kept texting me, asking if we could talk, if I was okay, trying to gauge where my head was at. I ignored every message. Let her sit in that uncertainty. Let her wonder what I was up to. It was the least she deserved. By the time I got home, it was late afternoon, and Amanda was waiting for me. She was sitting at the kitchen table, looking like she hadn't moved all day. "Dan, we need to talk," she said as soon as I walked in the door. "Not now," I repeated, my tone cold. "Later." Her face fell, but she didn't push it. Good. I needed her to feel powerless, to realize that she wasn't the one in control anymore. That night, while she was putting the kids to bed, I sat in the living room and pulled up her Facebook profile. I knew Amanda was meticulous about her privacy settings, keeping her circle small and carefully curated. But there was a backdoor to everything, and I'd spent enough time around her to know how to get into her accounts. It didn't take long before I was logged in as her, scrolling through her messages, her photos, her entire digital life laid bare in front of me. It didn't take long to find the messages between her and Chris. They were disgusting, full of "I miss yous" and "last night was amazing." It made my skin crawl, but I wasn't here for that. I was here to make sure everyone saw the real Amanda, not the version she'd been hiding behind for years. I started small, changing her profile picture to one of the photos I took of her and Chris kissing in the parking lot. Then, I uploaded the rest of the pictures to her photo album publicly. I made sure every single person on her friends list could see them. Her friends, her family, everyone who thought she was this perfect wife and mother. I wanted them to know what she really was. It wasn't long before the comments started rolling in. First, it was confusion, people asking if her account had been hacked, others wondering what was going on. Then, the shock set in. People who had known her for years were tagging her, asking her to explain herself, demanding to know what those photos were about. I sat back, watching it all unfold, feeling a grim satisfaction wash over me. This was my revenge. She had built her whole life on this perfect image, and I was tearing it down, piece by piece. About an hour later, Amanda came downstairs, her phone in her hand, her face pale as a ghost. "Dan, what did you do?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked up from the couch, my expression blank. What I had to. Her hands shook as she held up her phone, the screen glowing with the dozens of notifications she was getting. You posted those pictures?" Her voice cracked as the realization hit her. Yep, I said, standing up and walking toward her. People deserve to know the truth, don't you think? Dan, please, you have to take them down, she pleaded, her eyes wide with panic. People are going to see this. My family, my friends. I crossed my arms, watching her squirm. Exactly. You spent months sneaking around, lying to my face, and now you're worried about what people are going to think? You should have thought about that before. She was on the verge of tears again, her voice breaking as she spoke. Please, Dan. I'll do anything. Just take them down. We can fix this. We can talk about it. But please, don't ruin my life. I couldn't help but laugh at that. Ruin your life? You think I'm the one who ruined your life? No, Amanda, you did that all by yourself. She sank to the floor, her phone clutched in her hands, her face crumpling as the weight of what I'd done hit her. She was sobbing, begging me to undo it, but I wasn't listening. I was done listening to her lies, her excuses, her bullshit. I'll take them down, I said finally, but not until I'm ready. And not until you've paid for what you did. She looked up at me, hope flickering in her eyes. I'll do anything, Dan. Just tell me what to do. I stared down at her, feeling the power shift completely in my favor. She was broken, and for the first time in this whole mess, I felt like I had control. You're going to do exactly what I say from now on, I told her. No more lies, no more sneaking around. If I even think you're hiding something from me, those photos go right back up, and next time, they stay up for good. She nodded quickly, her tears falling freely now. I promise, Dan. I swear I'll do whatever you want. I didn't say anything else. I just turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there to cry alone. She thought this was over, that she could just beg for forgiveness and everything would go back to normal. But this was just the beginning. She was going to learn what it felt like to be betrayed. To have her life flipped upside down. And I was going to make sure she never forgot it. The house felt quiet the next day, almost unnaturally so. Amanda barely spoke, walking around on eggshells like she was afraid of setting me off. Good. She should be. But I wasn't done yet. Dealing with Amanda was one thing. The real target of my anger was still out there, living his life without a care, thinking he'd gotten away with screwing another man's wife. Chris. The smug bastard probably had no idea what was coming his way. I spent the morning at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, scrolling through everything I could find on Chris. Amanda had told me bits and pieces about him when we were still in the honesty phase of our relationship, the same phase where she conveniently left out that she was screwing him behind my back. He wasn't some random guy, he worked with Amanda. I guess that made things easier for them. All those late-night work meetings? Yeah, now they made sense. I found his social media profile easily enough. It wasn't locked down, and within minutes, I had more than enough to work with. Pictures of him at the gym, smiling at some office party, photos of him out with friends, living his life like nothing was wrong. Like he hadn't just been fucking my wife for weeks. I wasn't going to let that stand. I needed to hit him where it hurt, and I knew exactly how to do it. That afternoon, I made my move. I'd already pieced together enough about his routine to know where he'd be. Chris worked out at a local gym most nights around 6, the kind of place where people went to be seen, not just to work out. I wasn't exactly interested in catching him in the middle of some bench press, though. I had something better in mind. I headed to the gym, making sure to park where he wouldn't see my car. I knew I'd have to be careful, this wasn't the kind of thing you could just walk into unprepared. I took my time, making sure I had everything I needed before I got out and waited across the street, keeping an eye on the gym's entrance. Around 6:30, I saw him. Chris walked out of the gym, his hair still wet from a post-workout shower, dressed in casual clothes, probably thinking about what he'd be doing later. Maybe he had plans to meet up with Amanda again, who the hell knows? But he wasn't thinking about me. Not yet. I followed him to his car, staying back just far enough to not be noticed. He was oblivious, just scrolling through his phone, probably messaging someone about his great workout or whatever superficial crap filled his life. As he pulled out of the parking lot, I followed, keeping my distance, my mind racing with everything I wanted to do to him. He didn't live far from the gym, just a few blocks away in some upscale apartment complex. As soon as I saw where he was headed, I pulled over and waited. I wasn't going to storm in there like some hot-headed idiot. I needed him to feel this. To really understand what it meant to mess with another man's life. I sat there for a while, thinking. Should I confront him? Maybe. But a physical confrontation? That would be too easy, too quick. A punch to the face would feel good in the moment, but it wouldn't stick. No, this needed to last. This needed to hit deeper than a few bruises or a bloody nose. So I took a different approach. Chris had left his gym bag in his car when he went inside his apartment. I could see it through the window, sitting there in the front seat. I knew I had a short window of time to make my move, and adrenaline was already starting to kick in. The whole complex was quiet, the kind of place where people came home after work, locked their doors, and settled in for the night. I walked up to his car, glancing around to make sure no one was watching, and I pulled out a small, sharp tool I'd brought with me. A few quick, precise movements, and the car window was down, enough for me to slip my hand inside and unlock the door. I wasn't planning on stealing anything. This wasn't about theft. This was about sending a message. I grabbed his gym bag, unzipped it, and dumped everything onto the ground, his clothes, shoes, water bottle, all of it spilled across the parking lot. But that wasn't enough. I reached into the glove compartment, found his registration, and pulled it out, tearing it right down the middle before shoving the pieces back inside. Then, I reached into my pocket, pulled out one of the printed photos of Amanda and him kissing outside the motel, and stuck it under his windshield wiper. The thought of him finding that in the morning made my blood pump faster. I could picture it, the way his face would drop, the way he'd realize that this wasn't just some anonymous fling. That he hadn't gotten away with it. But I wasn't done. No, that was just the beginning. I took the rest of the photos I had of them together, every kiss, every touch, every disgusting moment I'd captured, and headed up to his apartment door. It wasn't locked. These fancy places never are, probably because they assume everyone's living in some safe, suburban bubble. I let myself in quietly, making sure not to make any noise as I moved through the hallways. His apartment was on the 3rd floor, and as I reached his door, I could hear music playing softly inside. Perfect. I slid the photos under his door. Each one, slowly, methodically, making sure they were spread out just enough that he'd see every single one of them as soon as he opened the door. Then, I knocked. 3 short knocks, just loud enough for him to hear over the music. I didn't wait for him to answer. I was already halfway down the stairs when I heard the door open. I could only imagine what went through his mind when he saw those photos, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. Let him deal with that mess. Let him explain it to himself, to Amanda, to whoever else he thought he could keep in the dark. By the time I got back to my car, my heart was racing, and my hands were still shaking, but not from fear. From the satisfaction of knowing I just ruined his night. Probably his week. Maybe even his life, if I played my cards right. I drove home slowly, thinking about what I'd done. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a start. Chris was going to learn that screwing around with someone else's wife wasn't something you just walked away from. He wasn't going to forget this. When I got home, Amanda was still awake, sitting on the couch in the same spot I'd left her earlier. She looked up at me, her face full of dread, like she knew something had happened, but didn't dare ask. "You should go to bed," I said coldly, not even looking at her as I walked past. She didn't argue. She just nodded and headed upstairs without another word. I sat down on the couch, staring at the dark screen of the TV, my mind still buzzing with everything I'd just done. Chris wasn't going to know what hit him. But this was far from over. I wasn't done with him yet, and I wasn't done with Amanda, either. They thought they could sneak around, lie, and get away with it. But they were wrong. This was just the beginning of what was coming to them. The house felt heavier than usual that morning. The silence wasn't just awkward, it was thick with tension, the kind that presses down on you until it's suffocating. I had spent most of the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the hell I had gotten here. It was finally time to deal with the elephant in the room, the thing we hadn't addressed yet. Divorce. I could feel Amanda's presence as she came down the stairs, but I didn't look up. I wasn't ready to see her face, the tears, or whatever excuse she'd try to throw at me. The truth was, I was done with it. Done with the pretending, done with the endless cycle of lies and apologies that meant nothing. I just wanted the nightmare to end. Dan, she said softly, as if tiptoeing around the inevitable, we need to talk. I finally glanced up, my eyes locking with hers. There it was, her red, swollen eyes, the result of crying all night, no doubt. But it didn't move me. The well of sympathy I once had for her was bone dry. I wasn't going to give her any more of my energy. Yeah, we do, I said, my voice low but steady. It's time. She hesitated for a moment, then sat down on the couch across from me. Her hands trembled as she fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, and for a brief second, I wondered if she was going to start crying again. Part of me hoped she wouldn't. I couldn't handle more of her tears, not today. I've been thinking, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. About what you said last night, about everything. And I know I hurt you. I know what I did was unforgivable. But, Dan, I don't want this to end. I don't want to lose everything we've built together. I stared at her, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Lose everything we've built together? It was almost laughable. She was still clinging to this idea that we could somehow patch things up, pretend like none of it ever happened. But there was no going back from this. She had crossed a line, and no amount of crying or begging was going to erase the damage she had done. You already destroyed everything, Amanda, I said bluntly, not bothering to soften the blow. The life we had? That's gone. You threw it away the moment you decided to sleep with him. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might break down again. But she didn't. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. I know, she whispered. I know I messed up. But, please, Dan, can we at least try to fix this? For the kids? For us? I leaned back in my chair, running a hand over my face. This was the part one had been dreading. The conversation where she'd beg for another chance, using the kids as leverage. And the worst part? She wasn't entirely wrong. We had 2 kids to think about, Max and Lily. The thought of tearing their lives apart, forcing them to choose between their parents, made me sick. But what kind of example would I be setting if I stayed in a marriage that had been built on lies and betrayal? Amanda, this isn't just something we can fix, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. You didn't just mess up. You betrayed me. You lied to me for weeks, maybe months. I don't even know if I'll ever get the full story. How do you expect me to just move past that? She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. I don't, she admitted. I know it's a lot to ask. But I love you, Dan. I really do. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. Counseling, therapy, whatever you want. I'll do it. Love. That word had become so meaningless now. She could throw it around all she wanted, but it didn't mean a damn thing. Not after everything. I don't think you understand, Amanda, I said, my voice harder than before. It's not just about doing therapy or counseling. It's about trust. And that trust? It's gone. You destroyed it. Her lip quivered, and she nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes again. I know, she whispered. But the kids, Dan. What about Max and Lily? I don't want them to grow up in a broken home. There it was, the kids. I knew this was coming, but it still hit hard. Of course, I didn't want them to grow up in a broken home either. But what kind of home would they have if I stayed with her? A home where their father resented their mother every day, where every smile and conversation was laced with bitterness and betrayal? That wasn't a home either. We're already in a broken home, Amanda, I said quietly. They just don't know it yet. She flinched at my words, like I had slapped her, but I didn't take them back. It was the truth. I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. But we don't have to be, she pleaded, her voice cracking. We can work through this. I know I've been horrible, but I'm still their mother, and I don't want to lose them. I don't want to lose us. I sighed, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I'm not going to take the kids away from you, I said, cutting her off before she could go any further down that road. That's not what this is about. I'm not here to rip our family apart. But we have to be honest, Amanda. This marriage? It's not what it used to be, and it never will be again. The room fell silent after that. The weight of my words settled between us like a thick fog, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. She wiped at her eyes, sniffling softly, trying to regain some composure. What do you want to do then? She finally asked, her voice small, fragile. I closed my eyes for a second, taking a deep breath before answering. I think we need to start talking about divorce. The word hung in the air like a dark cloud, and I saw the way her face crumbled when I said it. She looked like she was about to collapse in on herself, but I wasn't going to take it back. It was what needed to happen. I knew it, and deep down, she knew it too. Dan, please, she whispered, her voice shaking. I don't want that. I don't want a divorce. I can't lose you. I'll change, I swear. I'll do whatever it takes. I shook my head slowly. It's not about changing, Amanda. It's about what you've already done. We can't go back from this. No matter how hard you try, no matter how much you say you'll change, the damage is done. Her eyes filled with tears again, and she shook her head, refusing to accept it. But we can still be a family, Dan. We can figure this out. We don't have to throw it all away. I stood up then, needing to move, needing to get away from the desperation in her voice. I'm not throwing anything away, I said, my voice firm. You did that. This is the result of your choices, not mine. Amanda stood up too, wiping at her tears, trying to find some last shred of hope. So what now? She asked, her voice small. We just give up? I stared at her, feeling the weight of the last decade pressing down on me. The memories, the good times, the bad times, the kids, it all flashed through my mind in an instant. But none of it could change the fact that we had reached the end. I don't know yet, I said honestly. But I think we both need to face the fact that this marriage, it's over. She crumpled back onto the couch, her body shaking with quiet sobs. I stood there for a moment, watching her, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even heartbroken. I was just done. I'll give you some time, I said softly. We can talk about the details later. But I think it's best if we take some space for now. Amanda nodded, her face buried in her hands. She didn't say anything else, and I didn't either. I just turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there to process everything. As I walked upstairs, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The days after that conversation were filled with a strange, uneasy quiet. Amanda had stopped trying to fix things between us. There were no more tearful pleas for another chance, no desperate attempts at reconciliation. It was like she had finally accepted that things were over, and for the first time, I saw her move through the house like a ghost. We didn't talk much, and when we did, it was about the kids or something mundane, like bills or groceries. It was clear that we were living in two different worlds now, even though we were still under the same roof. I didn't know what to do next. I had thrown the word divorce out there, and she had broken down in front of me, but I hadn't made any real moves to make it official. I spent hours thinking about what it meant for the kids, for our lives, for everything we'd built together. Max and Lily were still too young to understand what was happening. For now, their world remained blissfully ignorant. But eventually, they'd have to know. That thought kept me up at night. One morning, about a week later, I made the decision I'd been putting off. It was time to see a lawyer. I needed to know what my options were, how this was all going to play out. Not just for me, but for the kids. As much as I hated Amanda for what she did, I didn't want this to turn into a nasty, drawn-out war over custody or assets. I wasn't interested in punishing her through the courts. I just wanted to move on. I found a local attorney with a solid reputation, someone who specialized in family law. I scheduled an appointment, and 2 days later, I was sitting in a stiff leather chair in his office, trying to explain everything that had happened without sounding too bitter or vengeful. It wasn't easy. I still felt raw every time I thought about Chris and what Amanda had done. But I kept reminding myself that this wasn't about revenge. It was about finding a way forward. "So, you're considering filing for divorce?" the lawyer asked, his pen poised over a legal pad. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah. I think it's the best option at this point." He glanced down at his notes before looking back at me. "You mentioned there was infidelity. That can impact the divorce proceedings, depending on how it's handled." "I've got proof," I said, feeling a grim satisfaction at the thought of the photos still sitting on my phone. "But I don't want this to turn into a circus. I just want to get through it and make sure the kids are okay." The lawyer nodded, scribbling something down. "I understand. We can handle this as amicably as possible, but I'll need to see the evidence you mentioned. It will help with negotiations, especially when it comes to things like custody and division of assets." Custody. That word hit me hard. I hadn't really thought much about it yet, but the reality was starting to sink in. Max and Lily were going to have to split their time between two homes. It wasn't just about Amanda and me anymore. It was about them. "How does custody usually work in cases like this?" I asked, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "Well, in most cases, courts tend to favor joint custody, unless there's a compelling reason not to," he explained. "The goal is to keep the kids' lives as stable as possible, which usually means both parents remain involved in their upbringing. You'd likely share time with them, maybe alternating weeks or something similar. It all depends on what you and Amanda can agree on." I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. Joint custody. The thought of sending my kids back and forth between houses made my chest tighten. But what choice did I have? It wasn't like I could keep them all to myself. Amanda was their mother, and despite everything she'd done, she still loved them. "I don't want to fight over the kids," I said finally. "I just want what's best for them." The lawyer gave me a sympathetic nod. "That's the right attitude to have. If you and Amanda can come to an agreement, it will make things much smoother. But if not, we'll have to take it to court, and that can get messy." I didn't want messy. I wanted it over. The lawyer gave me a folder of documents to review, outlining the basic steps of the process, financial disclosures, parenting plans, the whole thing. It was overwhelming, but I knew it was something I had to face sooner or later. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat down at the I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, questioning my entire marriage after 12 years. You know, those stories you hear about a cheating wife always seem so distant, like something that happens to other people, not me. But here I am, living it. The name's Dan, and I thought my wife, Amanda, and I had a solid thing going. We've got 2 kids, Max, 10, and Lily, 8. I've always been the one pulling extra shifts to make sure the bills are paid and that the kids never go without. Amanda, well, she's been a stay-at-home mom since Max was born. It was a decision we both agreed on, and I was fine with it. But lately, something's been off, you know? I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. The usual stuff, she seemed a little more distant, started going out more, getting drinks with the girls or needing some me time at the gym. I wasn't really bothered at first, everyone needs their space. Hell, with 2 kids running around, space becomes a luxury, right? Then, she started dressing differently. Amanda has always been attractive, but in the last few weeks, she's been putting in extra effort. New clothes, more makeup, working out harder than usual. I even commented on it, told her she looked great, and she just smiled and said she wanted to feel good about herself. Fair enough. But the weirdest part? The phone. The damn phone was always glued to her hand. And not in that normal, scrolling Instagram way. She started keeping it on silent and face down, which was a new habit. At first, I brushed it off. Then it started feeling intentional. Like she was trying to hide something. Still, I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband who suspects his wife is cheating just because she's acting different. But there's always that gnawing feeling, that gut instinct you can't shake once it sets in. It all came to a head last Friday night. Amanda had been out late again. She said it was dinner with her girlfriends, but when she came back, it was well past midnight, and she smelled like perfume that wasn't hers. I'm not talking about her usual scent either. This was new, something stronger, almost overpowering. She barely said a word when she got in, just went straight to the shower and then to bed. I'm lying there, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it. Was I just overthinking? Maybe she was just having a good time. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, after she fell asleep, I grabbed her phone. It was password protected, but I'd seen her unlock it a million times. I knew the code. As soon as I opened it, I saw a string of texts from a name I didn't recognize, Chris. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just the usual thanks for the great night or some innocent message. It was more explicit. More intimate. The kind of message you don't send to someone unless there's something going on. I didn't need to scroll much further before it hit me. Amanda was cheating. No denying it now. The texts left little to the imagination. They'd been meeting for weeks, maybe longer. There were details about when and where they'd hook up, and more. I felt like I was going to be sick. It's crazy how quickly things can unravel. One minute, you're lying in bed next to someone you've built a life with, and the next, you're questioning if anything about that life was ever real. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was racing with questions. How long had this been going on? Did she ever plan on telling me? Was this some kind of phase, or was she planning to leave? More importantly, what the hell was I going to do about it? The next morning, I went through the motions like everything was normal. I helped get the kids ready for school, made breakfast, all while Amanda acted like nothing had changed. She didn't know I knew. She thought her secret was safe. But now, the ball was in my court. Saturday morning was unbearable. I couldn't stop replaying those texts in my head, each one more incriminating than the last. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I had to know everything. I had to catch her in the act. But I couldn't just confront her without proof. If I was going to blow up my marriage, I was going to make sure there were no doubts left. That's when I came up with a plan. I wasn't proud of it, but at this point, pride wasn't part of the equation.